A very good morning to everyone. It's a lovely spring morning here. It still feels a bit cold for me, but that's just personal reasons. But thank you so much for honoring us with your presence this morning. I know you are all incredibly busy people, and to make some time available for this initiative does not go unnoticed, so thank you very much for that. I'll be your master of ceremonies for this morning. My name is Yamkela Ntola. I am part of the Future Africa Scientific and Technical Committee, which is part of this program. And without wasting too much time, because I know this is quite a time-sensitive thing, I'll just give you a breakdown and give you some housekeeping rules. But before I give you the breakdown, if anyone needs the toilets, if you walk through that door over there, the very last door on your left is the ladies. Second to that, you'll just turn into a corridor, and the first door on your right is the gents. Gents, you shouldn't miss it. I think it smells very good near there. I think the kitchen is there. May I please just ask that you please keep your phones on silent. If you do want to take a phone call, you're more than welcome to take it so outside. And unless you are speaking, may I just please request that you do keep your mask on, just so that we do observe the COVID-19 protocols. Ladies and gentlemen, our program today is split up into three. The first part of our program, we will have an introduction, and before I say so, I must say thank you to the French Embassy for hosting this event. His Excellency, Mr. Le Chevalier, do I have it correctly? Perfect. Who has agreed to host us as part of the CLAB Africa program. We are indeed very grateful for your hospitality and for your support for this initiative, and we look forward to further collaboration in this regard. So His Excellency will give some introductory remarks, followed by Professor Mbao, who will give a background as to what the program entails, what the nature of the program, what milestones we have attained, and what milestones we are aiming to do so. Subsequent to that, we will then have brief addresses from members of the technical committee in the CLAB project. That will be the Climate, Land, Agriculture, and Biodiversity. And the basis of that address is to pretty much give some feedback with regards to the work we have done. What we have currently is working on the reports and have compiled a lot of the literature and the scientific contributions that we've received from experts. So the second part of that program will to give you some feedback as to the practical, innovative examples that could be used for policy uptake. Subsequent to that, which will be the last part of our session, we will then have short addresses from some of our partners who have also been very generous together with the French Embassy in supporting this initiative. We will have two areas where we can take comments and questions. That will be following the second part from the technical committee, and also following the last part of the program. So without further ado, His Excellency, Mr. Ambassador.
Thank you very much, Doctor. Good morning to everyone. Welcome to the French residence. It's a pleasure to be with you this morning. I greet our special happy few guests here. I think we are respecting the COVID protocols. And also I greet those who are joining us online. Most of our participants today are online. Some of them will speak and be part of the program and the presentation, and others will listen and also interact and ask questions. So welcome to everybody. It's a very important moment for us, a program that is very close to our heart, that we've been working on this last month. And now we feel the excitement because really it's almost ripe. I will come back to this. And today it's a very important milestone, because we are in the last stage, the last phase of the drafting of the report and the recommendations and the proposals and the very concrete proposals that will be then presented to the leaders. So thank you very much for being a part of it, an active part of it. I would like, of course, to greet the ambassadors who are here this morning, our partners, the Gates Foundation, the UN Environment Programme, the Department of Forestry, Fisheries, and the Environment, University of Pretoria, and the Future Africa campus, of course. We'll speak a lot about you and your role as a platform and coordinator on this very special program, and all those who have been working on this initiative. Last August the 5th, I think, there was an article in the Financial Times. And the title of this article was Africa has been cropped out of the climate debate. I don't know if you remember that article. It's a very good article, but the title is very scary. And I think, actually, that's the reason why we're here today, because we don't want Africa to be cropped out of the climate debate. Certainly not. We want to do everything we can to avoid this. Now we know the extent of the climate disruption, even more after the release of the last UN IPCC report, also at the beginning of August. Now we know for sure, there is no doubt anymore, that the human activities are fully responsible for this climate change. Now we know the extent of the loss of biodiversity in the world today. Scientifically, we are aware of everything. And we know also that the impact on Africa, especially, is massive. The African continent represents less than 3% of the global emissions. If we look at the consolidated emissions since the beginning of the 20th century, is less than 1%, but in terms of impact, it's massive. And Africa is one of the most vulnerable continents and one of the most affected continents by climate change and, of course, the loss of biodiversity on the planet. And that's why we have to act now. And we know that the effect of climate change here is accelerated compared with other parts of the world. There is, I think, one figure from the IPCC report that said that in South Africa, for example, the acceleration of the climate change effects is twice the rhythm, the pace of the average acceleration of climate disruption in the world. That's a figure that Minister Creasy has been using a lot these last weeks. And in certain regions like Central Africa, the tropical also areas of Africa, it's even more, sometimes 4 times, 5 times the impact compared with the average already very frightening effect of climate change. So these are facts that we know, and we know also that we need to act. The good news is that we will have many opportunities to act in the near future. We can act locally, of course. That's what we've been doing on our responsibilities, but there will be major international events that we need to take advantage of to make sure that action is really here and that we are moving forward. The agenda is full of opportunities if we know how to seize them. There will be, starting at the end of this week in France, the World Nature Congress, organized by the IUCN. Every 4 years, there is this World Nature Congress. It will be hosted in Marseille, in the south of France, a very important platform, a hybrid platform from the start with governments, international organizations, the civil society, the scientific community, and they will be gathered from Saturday to the end of next week to really fine-tune the level of knowledge that we have on biodiversity, and also to get ready for even more ambitious proposals for the next international decision-making events in the near future. There will be, of course, the pre-COP in Italy, the COP26 in Glasgow, the Africa-France Summit in Montpellier. There will be the Biodiversity COP also as well. It will be starting virtually, as far as we understand, in October, but then there will be in China, Kunming, the summit next year. There will be also next year the European Union Africa summits. So these are all major opportunities that we need to seize in order of accelerating climate action and the fighting against the loss of biodiversity and desertification. But for this to be useful, we need to know what is the most important action for Africa. And that's why we're here. Because some time ago, we thought about all of this and the international agenda and the situation, the dire situation in Africa, the severe impact of climate change. And we thought that it would be very important to listen to the African scientists themselves. Because in Africa, you have top scientists. They're well known. They participate in different international fora, at the UNFCCC, at the IPBES, at the IPCC. I mean, they are part of other international groups, very high-level groups, to design this and to shape this science and these recommendations. But as far as we know, there was no place where African scientists would be together, look at the facts from the ground, and design special recommendations from an African perspective on Africa. So that's why we decided that we would team up to design this particular initiative that we call the Voice of Africa. And this is why we are here today, because that's indeed what we've done, thanks to the different partners, thanks to the University of Pretoria and Future Africa campus, because the Future Africa have been identifying the different scientists from all over the African continent. And we have, I think, more than 35 scientists that have already participated in the program for the last months, and there will be more to come. It's a lot of work, it's a lot of coordination, and we are talking about very busy people with busy schedule, but they have committed to participate in this program. We organized last June a symposium here from Pretoria. It was also mostly online due to the COVID situation, but it was a very important 3-day symposium where for the first time all these top African scientists would gather, exchange their ideas, perspectives and proposals on climate, biodiversity, food security, agriculture. And since the end of June, we have worked, I say we, the scientific community, the platform, have been working on this data collection and is designing this report and these proposals that hopefully, we are working on it, should be ready by the end of this month. So today is really, for us, a very important moment, the starting point of the last phase of this journey. Well, there will be more, of course, to come, and we have already plans for next year, but at least to be ready to shape these recommendations and together to take these recommendations, introduce them to the leaders, and make sure that the African voice, the voice of Africa, is heard, is listened to, and will play a decisive and active role in the decision-making process at the highest international level in the weeks and months to come. So today we will hear the presentation on where we are. The next weeks will be very important because we will be finalizing the drafting of the report. And what we would like to do, of course, it's a very solid peer review based coordination, because the report must be very sound, very strong in terms of scientific knowledge. So this peer review mechanism, if I may say, is already in place. But what we would like to see also is a commitment from the different partners, from the countries, from you actually, to engage with us and to exchange with us your idea, your thoughts, your recommendations to make sure that we are the most impactful as possible by early October. So you see, it's a very important moment today. There will be presentations. There will be a chance for you to jump in and to ask maybe the first questions. And then after today's event, of course, we can receive written questions, written proposals, and organize the interaction with all of you to make sure that it's an inclusive and even stronger process to lead to this final report and ambition that we have in mind. I've been too long, as usual, so I will stop here, step aside, and it's an African-led initiative. So thank you again for being here and for joining the team. Now you're part of the team, and I will let Professor Shekembao to continue, make the first statements after our Master of Ceremony will take over, and we'll be here to continue. Thank you very much.
I'm just going to make sure they have you.
Yes, I think it's all right. Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure for me to be here today and to bring the whole team of Future Africa to come and do a restitution, like a feedback of the work we have been doing. So I have an overarching role. That means that I have little details on what is going on. The team will give you the deep dive on exactly what we need to achieve and what we have been in the process of achieving in this Club Africa initiative. It sounds very well, the acronym Club Africa. It looks like a club of purpose or something, but it's more serious than that. We're working more on the science part to elevate the voice of Africa on the climate change debate. It's a special day today, not only being hosted by His Excellency, the French Ambassador, Mr. Aurélien de Chevalier. It's a real privilege to be acquainted with such huge authorities and personalities on climate change in Africa. But it's another special day because I have met here some fellow Senegalese citizens. One of them is my ambassador, Madame Sophia Tundiaye, who I knew quite young as a Minister of Culture, defending the African values, culture, and norms and different aspect of the relationship that Africa has with other regions in terms of culture. The historical heritage that Africa should show, display. And her interest in this work is exactly the same motive, the heritage we have as a brain of Africa to elevate our voice to that level. Thank you so much, Excellency, for accepting. And another incidental meeting connection I had today is the Director Africa for Gate Foundation. I happened to travel with him. I happened to interact with him. We were sharing meals in Nairobi, but I could not make the connection until we met today. Sheikh Omar Saidi is another Senegalese guy. They're genuinely and graciously supporting this initiative, particularly to make it a long-term commitment. We just don't want it to make it one-off commitment whereby we release our reports this year and things will stop there. The Gates wants this to be a continuing effort in Africa, where beyond the 4 clusters we are working to today or this round, we continue protracting on ideas on the few years to come, and because this is a need space for a connection between scientists and decision makers. And not the least, Your Excellency, Tobias, let me call you by your name, because I've been the first time landing in Kastrup Airport for my first contact in Europe in Denmark. I was one of the fellows, the Danida fellows, they call it enhancement of research capacity. And I'm so proud that that enhancement of research capacity took me here today at the French Embassy to talk on the voice, on the name of Africa for the science we do. I was in Copenhagen University, and I won the prize in 2018 of the Danida Prize with the minister, and it was really an honor to be recognized by a country. I thank you so much for what you brought to us. And this kind of support to unlock the potential of Africa is exactly what we want to do. In this very initiative, we are in contact with the African group of negotiators, and we want to have massive training of critical mass building for climate change, land, agriculture, and biodiversity. The reason is, if you just take the set of authors that are participating in IPCC, just to name one of them, it's less than 2% of African scientists. And yet the African continent is over 30% of the global stakes in terms of climate change. So we think there was a kind of unbalance in there. And the only way you can do it is to create a bottom-up approach that brings the African knowledge to the level of elaboration that can be feeding into this global report. So this is the framework, and the thank word to everyone who participated in this process. As myself, I want to just go through a few slides to give you the framework in which we're working. I don't have a prompt, so I need to be a little bit like this. So these are the 4 areas we are working. And as you can see, we are not coming here in the same structure as other reports where we are talking about mitigation to climate change, adaptation to climate change. And we are trying to pitch ideas that brings the knowledge to the decision makers. And therefore, you need to name areas of actions. The areas of action is how climate change is impacting food security. One interesting aspect in Africa is really related to that. And you will hear the team just giving you the initial inputs and the policy requirement for that. The land restoration, the framework is huge. The bond challenge is there. The African program for 100 million hectares reforestation is there. The Great Green Wall is there. So the need is there, the appetite, the demand of information on land restoration is really protracted in African Union, the Green Stimulus, etc. So we have a team on that. The people-animal health ecosystem brings the well-being issues. If you take countries like the Sahelian countries, how animals interact with people, what the requirement of food supply from animal side, which is absolutely important, including fisheries. And all those aspects beyond agriculture are deeply affected by climate change. So we have that team which is trying to get that cross-cutting biosphere, animal, people sort of interaction. And not the least, and it was quite selective, the issues of land, water, energy connection. The potential of Africa is absolutely huge on the water and energy area. Just close your eyes a while and think of the solar energy potential of Africa, 2,000 watts per square meters in the Sahel. Only the solar energy can feed in the need of energy for Africa. And if you combine that with the deep potential of groundwater, you have enough energy to take that and to completely transform the agriculture process in Africa just because of those 2 real assets we have in nature. And land, 60% of the fertile land is happening. We have it in Africa. The extension of food security from the use of the land is absolutely crucial. So you see that we are working on cross-cutting issues. We are not so much bringing our forces to specific aspects of the international discussion because the international agenda is not always addressing the vulnerability requirement for Africa. And at the same time, I met in 2015, I was one of the privileged scientists who was advising the French government at that time for the Paris Agreement. We was 15, and I met my Minister of Environment from Senegal at that time, who says, "You have been doing great work in IPCC, but I don't know how to apply it in my country." Because the reality is so general, the statement is so overarching that trying to break it down to tangible actions on the ground was a challenge for our policymakers. So there was a big implementation gap in that very respect. And we are trying to build the implementation gap by making innovation recommendation in each of them. And this is the process. The process is trying to value what the African literature is all about. If you see all the global reports, what comes out is they get papers published in Nature, in PNAS, in those big impact factor journals. But we have many thousands of universities, many thousands of PhD trained, many thousands of technical reports that are not valued in this global assessment because it's flagged as gray literature, which means a second order level of literature, which is not the top-notch science we need. But if you try to really make recommendation for the requirement for implementation on the ground. The best literature that sticks on that reality are that grey literature. The report that University of Pretoria do in Swane area, the report that Ouagadougou University do on Tugu landscape, the report of Njala University in Sierra Leone do on the area of land degradation in the north of Sierra Leone. And these reports are literally unknown or unused by the scientists, by the decision makers. And we want really to uplift them to the level of formality, which brings that knowledge to those people. So we are not focusing on problems, because I think we know climate change is impacting various aspects of life, but we will focus more onto the implementation gap. What do we know more to do things differently? And that's the reason why we have this two-way traffic, where from the science side, we get some working group that is led by my team here. So we have integrated evidence, and then we create different summaries and space where people can come and ask questions and respond. So a virtual collaborative platform is likely to be established thanks to the funding we are pitching with GATE now, where people can go and say, I want to know how to implement climate-smart agriculture, but where do they know to do it? There's no compendium of such a practice in Africa. We were likely having a Future Africa University of Pretoria in this program to create the space where a person who's sitting in Egypt or Kenya can come in and see what the options by context that you have in different places of Africa, and get a person to talk to. He can be from Uganda, he can be from Botswana, he's from Africa somewhere, who can give more additional insight on what is needed for him to implement this policy on the ground. So that's the ambition, and you have seen the map there. We are a bit weak in Northern Africa. We have Morocco. I have a few friends there, but I still have to pitch people from Tunisia, because the level of agriculture we have in Tunisia is quite Mediterranean, which is not our expertise. That's natural bias, but we need to really get more people. His Excellency, for information, more people from Northern Africa. We are very weak on that side. So in terms of action areas, mobilize all the authors, the best brains we have. Obviously, His Excellency mentioned it. They are solicited in many endeavors, and they're very busy people. That's why we put a technical team to facilitate the skimming and the synthesis of the information. But the idea is really to activate the network of authors who are expert in various disciplines to respond to what the policy requirement in terms of climate change, land, and agriculture is. The second action area is networking. Africa is not so much interlinked with themselves. If I said, get my examples, I'm more linked with Copenhagen. Most of my publication, we will see Kjell Rasmussen, you will see Rasmus Fensholt, you will see Thomas Theis Nielsen, and these are the people with which I've been grown in science, and we keep contacting during publication. But it's very rare, the Gambia, which is just a few miles away from Dakar, to be in connection with us to work on the same thematic area. So reconnecting African scientists and building a network is absolutely crucial, because we have some similar realities, and the level of transformation, the pace of transformation is quicker if we get that network established. Then the improvement of the African abilities to engage with decision makers. This is central to this project. I came from I'm an academic by training, but I have been working at the World Agroforestry Center in NGOs for capacity building. What I realize is that we don't talk enough with the decision makers, and we really need to create that space. And thank you for this initiative. It has created that space. So, and the third and last one is the representation. We can't talk about climate change by ignoring any space in geographies. Every geography counts, every knowledge in different geographies counts. There is no marginal land in Africa, as is stated in different reports. And therefore, we need to get scientists from various areas to reflect what's going on in their small spot of land, and how to use that information to create the transformation we want. And this is, at the nutshell, what we want to achieve. The way we work, we get scientists from all parts of Africa, and the initial scoping is an iterative process. I think, Ambassador, we met on breakfast, we met on tea, we have really made different inter-exchanges. We did the same with GATE, we did the same with UNEP, and we had initial meeting with DEF also, and we engaged with African Development Bank, with IFAD. I've been Kenya several times to meet with stakeholders, with the CG centers, etc. And that will bring us to narrow down on areas of cross-sectional science that we need to do, and that scoping is quite crucial, and from which we select the profile of scientists we need, The working group is here. They will present the results. Then we will have review. And this time's review is not just a review by us scientists where we congratulate each other from the great science we do. We want the review to be done by users. We will send it to ministries. We will send it to different stakeholders to say whether it makes sense or not, what we say, and there is any aspect of the work we have forgotten in the process. And then we will create different outputs, and the outputs will come out later. It will be policy brief, training materials, virtual training, critical mass building in Africa, many other things in the few years to come. So the impact will be manifold on the environmental actions, the protection of biodiversity, restoration, climate change, etc., and a set of deliverables with the compilation of science, high-level synthesis, a compendium of instruments and innovation that is being applied in different parts of Africa. The policy briefs will be there, the translation of report, because the language is absolutely crucial. You can't feel it if you are not a Francophone. If you are only reading and speaking in French and knowing that the global science outputs are all written in English, you're missing 80% of the stakes and the knowledge that is going. And that's a fact. I can't emphasize this more. And what we need to do is to get an equal engagement from all scientists of all Africa, and particularly West Africa. And we do the effort to speak English. I'm not sure there are many Anglophones who speaks French the way I speak English. So it's a fact we need to recognize. And by just getting all those reports and engaging into translating at least into French, we will cover maybe 70%. We still have the Arabic countries who speak either English or French, and the Lusophone countries. And now new, African language are being official language like Kiswahili, etc. So we are very keen into getting that knowledge to the users, and it needs to be in languages that they understand that they can use. And the rest are a number of things that we want to do. And this is the first meeting, a host of scientists were there. We did everything virtual, which was suboptimal, but we managed to do it, and we hope by the end of the year to use all those people, not only to participate on the report, but to be the ambassadors. We want to have regional nodes. We want West Africa to organize their own workshop, their own training. East Africa to do the same, the Central African part, similar things. Here in Southern Africa, Future Africa will play that role to engage and keep going with these people. On that note, His Excellency, Director of Program, I thank you very much for the opportunity, and we're looking forward to give you more details in different cluster presentations that are coming soon. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor, just for giving us an overview of what the CLAB project is about. Just to give you some background on the methodology that was utilized in order to get to this particular point. We started earlier this year by a general literature review, which we had great assistance from our 30-plus experts, in line with the objectives that we sought to achieve in each cluster. Once we had that and we had a solid base to work from, we had taken a lot of the innovations, and over here this is going to be the emphasis, particularly with the presentations, and we had proposed them as preliminary findings in the symposium. And it was indeed within that symposium where the experts were able to debate, propose other innovations and examples, and in so doing also supply the relevant literature so it has a sound scientific basis, which informs a great deal the drafting of the reporting process. So the presentation today, a key thing to look out for are those innovations. What I can say as part of the drafting team is that Africa isn't lacking in commitment with regards to the respective objectives. If anything, the legal instruments, the policy instruments that exist both at an international as well as a regional level speak large in part to that commitment. What is more is that if you were to look at the commitment of the respective states within Africa, the ratification of instruments, the giving into effect of those particular instruments, those commitments are indeed embedded in those governance instruments. What this initiative seeks to achieve is to identify how then can those African states, with tangible results give effect to that commitment. So what you will see is an example from a rural community in Kenya, for instance, or an example for a rural community in Namibia that has taken cognizance of adaptation measures that it needs to implement in order to look after its own food security. And the question we aim to achieve here is how then do we take those practical examples and those innovations and upscale them not only at a national level, but at a sub-regional level as well as a regional level, to not only say that this is what Africa has committed to, but this is what Africa has done to give effect to that commitment. So in the presentation today, I think it's very important to look out for those innovations, what they entail, and what challenges have been identified in that regard. So there will be 4 presentations. The first one will be with Dr. Ennis. That symposium, or that part of the symposium, was chaired by Prof. Sibanda, who is here. Welcome, Prof. Subsequent to that, I will then give the presentation for the second cluster, and that was chaired by Professor Musondiri. Thirdly, Dr. Edmund Totten, who will be joining us from Benin virtually, and that cluster was chaired by Professor Erasmus, who's unfortunately not here, I haven't seen him. And lastly, we will have Dr. Ennis, who will give us a report on the last cluster, and that was chaired by Prof. Mbao. So without further ado, Ennis and Prof. Sibanda. So here's the clicker now. Okay.
All right. Yeah, it should be there. Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be part of this meeting where there are high-profile people from different countries. And it was also a pleasure to be part of this cluster. Okay. All right. Part of this cluster on climate change impacts on food systems. I'm going to give it over to Prof. Sibanda to give us details on the presentation. Thank you.
Excellency, good morning, and Director of the program, all protocol observed. It's an honor to be sharing products from Africa. In most cases, we share our own products, but as Prof. Mbao has said, this is a product from Africa. We're talking about climate change and its effects on food systems. And I think what I want to really unpack before I go any further is what is it that we talk about when we say food systems? The narrative we are used to is food security, nutrition security, but the world has moved on. It has realized that when we talk about food security and nutrition, we silo everything into a farmer, we silo everything into agriculture. And yet, food systems affect you, affect me, but most important, they are players in the value chain, right from the farm to the fork, to the dining room, to the dustbin. So the new narrative is food systems, and it's no wonder that the Secretary General of the UN has elevated this dialogue into Food Systems Summit that will be the subject of debate at the forthcoming UN General Assembly 23 September. So in my presentation, I'll dig deep into the challenges of climate change on food systems. That's from the farm to the dining table to the dustbin. I'll also talk about the existing governance frameworks that have guided our dialogue. I'll talk about the shortcomings of these governance frameworks and then touch on some actions that are low-hanging fruits that we should really be putting a spotlight on so that as we dig into innovations that can take us to a leapfrog environment where we are climate smart, not only sustainable, but restoring and regenerating our nature. That's where we want to be. So quickly, in terms of climate change, we know that when we talk food systems, when we talk about agriculture, it's both an emitter and a solution. If we do our agriculture right, we can achieve net zero. So let's look at the different food system components, which in turn can be leveraged for us to be climate smart. We want to achieve territorial balance. We want environmental sustainability. We want equitable, thriving livelihoods. That's where we are, and that's our dream. But where we are messing up the environment. As a result of that mess, we are getting floods, we are getting droughts, we are getting cyclones, erratic weather, and all this is because we are polluting the environment. What then do we want to do? We want to be climate smart. What then are the technologies that can make us climate smart? What are the innovations that we should be focusing on in food systems? Let's look at what our governing institutions have, how they've located this topic. If you look at the international arena, the Sustainable Development Goals, all 17 of them talk to food. You touch any one of them. SDG 1 is eradicating poverty. Poor people cannot access healthy diets. SDG 2 is eradicating hunger, zero hunger. Without addressing that, we cannot achieve our SDGs by 2030. And the big one of the lot is SDG 17, where we say without smart partnerships as we are convened today, we need your researchers, you need your policymakers, you need private sector, you need governments with the governing framework. And that's why we are in it together. At regional level, we have the Africa we want. The Africa we want says dignity to Africans. And dignity to me is about food security. It's about making sure we have healthy diets, healthy people, and a healthy planet. So it's located right there in the Africa we want. At sub-regional level, our regional economic communities, right from the south, SADC, East African Community, ECOWAS, and in the north, they're all dealing with the issues of climate-smart food systems. And unfortunately, when it comes to the implementers, when it comes to your farmer, the programs that are in place are not really in tune with what the governance frameworks are talking to. When it comes to policies, the policies are mostly bookwork, and yet, as Africa, there are certain things that we should be putting a spotlight on, which we know once worked, which needs scaling up. We also need to be communicating better to our policymakers. We also need to be investing more in research so that we share best practices and we package this for policy development. So what are the different actions that we need to be taking for us to transform to a climate-smart environment? I've highlighted them there, but I think what's really important is to make sure that most of this is not new, is to understand that most of what we're talking about is not new. It's about making sure we can zero in on getting to that inner circle of scaling up, and there's no better way to scale up than influencing policy and making sure the policy, the green circle, is evidence-based. What do we need? We need big data and ICT investments. As you can see, we are reaching out to the world through ICT, and we need to be investing more. When I went to school, ICT was for the mathematicians and those who wanted to study computers. But every day, everybody is now touched by ICT. More important in agriculture and food systems, it's the game of big data. So we need to be putting more money into initiatives that enable us to be well-schooled in that and to move forward. We also need to look at resilience, low emissions. We also need to be talking about financing mechanisms that can leverage on these innovations so that they can be taken to scale, and that's where private sector comes in big. We need to look at our supply chains. As I said, it's from farm to the fork. What is it that we need to be doing to reduce those emissions, but more important, to be climate smart? And we need to empower the producers, because most of us are into highly processed foods. And yet, if we're empowered to know the damage those foods are causing and the waste that goes with the interventions that we are making, uninformed, we would be making a difference in our behavior. So what I know is that it said that if food waste and loss was a country, it would be the third biggest emitter after the US and China. So when you leave that food on the table, when you leave the snakes, just think to yourself, is it going to the dustbin, or is it going to be recycled, or it's going to feed other people? Let me move now to the innovations. We've talked about the biggest game changer is in the policy game. Unfortunately, most of our researchers are not trained and they shy away from the policy discourse, and we leave it mainly to the economists, and yet it's a game for all of us. We need to be generating that evidence, packaging it so that it can inform our African policies so that they are not cut and paste. Let me just go back in terms of the technologies. I didn't say my table on technologies. One thing I wanted to bring up was the issue of sustainability, and maybe just talk about the new dynamic that's at play. It's one thing to achieve 2030 and be sustainable, and sustainability means we're getting more for less. We are extracting less from our environment, but yielding more food. The new narrative is moving to restoring, thank you, it's moving towards restoring our environment. And the best example I can give there is we've been cutting forests so that we clear more land for agriculture. But if we use the very same farmers to increase their productivity, there may not be much pressure to cut down trees. But the trees have already been cut. So the first thing we need to do is to restore. So from sustainability, let's move to restoration. After restoration, the new narrative now is regeneration. Now, regeneration is the new dynamic, and our team is busy searching hard for best practices that can now inform that regeneration agenda. What that means is that you then ask yourself, if the people who cut down trees have now restored the trees, what are they going to use for cooking? Because they were not just cutting the trees so that they could plant more food, they were also using the firewood. So when you move to the regeneration agenda, you are now cross-cutting into other sectors and taking a landscape approach and saying lives are at the center of development. How are these people going to cope without the trees that they are cutting? So it means we need solar stoves, for example. So that's the new narrative on regenerative agriculture, which is really exciting, that we are now solving societal problems. Previously, when I was trained, we used to say, stop cutting trees, it's bad. We are going to put more fertilizer in your land, you will double your yields. But we never went back to say to the farmers, what's your coping mechanism? Are your livelihoods affected? Now, this regenerative approach is taking a landscape approach where you really put people at the center with all the innovations we are making and asking, if I've intervened policy-wise, who are the winners and losers, and what else should I be looking at? So for me, this is the exciting part with what Prof. Mbao has introduced at Future Africa, where we are no longer working in silos. We are moving from sustainability to restoration to regeneration, which forces us to talk to other silos, open them up so that we work in a cross-sectoral, transdisciplinary manner to address the challenges that we face. So we've looked at financing mechanisms, we've looked at climate services, we need to improve data. We've looked at basic things like irrigation, and you're asking the question, should it be the old irrigation style, or there are new, better ways of conserving water, recycling it, and putting it back to the earth? So all that is the new way of doing business, where we customize technologies that we're flying and ground them to livelihood needs. So I just want to close there. Thank you. Thank you, Ines.
Thank you very much, Prof. Sibanda and Dr. Ennis, for your presentation. Just ladies and gentlemen, just to inform you, we will take questions after we've concluded this part. So if you have any questions or comments, please hold on to them, and then we will have 5-10 minutes to take your comments on your questions. We can then go on to the next presentation. This cluster was chaired by Prof. Musundiri from the University of Technology from Zimbabwe, and I was the technical assistant at hand. And this cluster is on people, animals, and ecosystems. And the objective for it was to pursue, or is to pursue, recommendations for improving human health through interventions in ecosystems and animal health. So just to give you a breakdown, so what I will outline from here is what are the challenges, looking at the key governance frameworks, what we've identified as a key shortcoming within that framework, and then look at one particular innovation, which I will discuss and also indicate the value chain which it can be uptaken. So I think the most authoritative body that we have that has discussed this particular point is the Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, which is the IPBES, and they produced a report in 2018 on land degradation and restoration. And concerning this particular cluster, there were 4 key challenges that they had identified. The first being that changes in ecosystem services do not affect people equally, and often the poor and the most vulnerable are the most adversely affected. And that people live in complex societies, and any impact of ecosystem services on quality of life is mediated through institutions and social structures. Water security is directly linked to human health, food and energy security, yet ecosystems that help maintain freshwater supplies, such as forests and wetlands, continue to be degraded. And lastly, is that being connected to nature, or even simply viewing natural scenes positively, affects psychological well-being in many ways. And key governance frameworks that actually apply to this particular cluster. And before I get into this, it's also very important to know that it is a cross-cutting cluster. And as a result, the governance frameworks that speak to it will be an array of them. So for instance, at an international level, we speak specifically of Goal 3 of the SDGs. We look specifically at the first aspiration of the AU Agenda 2063, which speaks to health and well-being of citizenry, making sure that populations within the African community are well nourished. But then there becomes a challenge in this room, because you don't necessarily see this explicit provision prevailing within regional as well as sub-regional instruments, right? And the basis for that is because it is a very cross-cutting cluster. However, when you consider the spirit of instruments such as the Convention on Biological Diversity, when you consider the spirit of the UN Convention, the Human Framework Convention on Climate Change, as well as the AU Convention on Natural Management, it actually does speak to health and well-being, right? And from there, when you consider the fact that African states, as I earlier indicated, are participants in these instruments, it does speak then to the direct link that there is an obligation to give effect to this effect. So for instance, if we are looking at the 3 elements, that being people, animals, as well as ecosystems, that resonates through the Convention on Biological Diversity. I earlier mentioned the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. Also, when you look at the African Charter on Humans and People's Rights, which makes provision for health and well-being and living in a safe and good environment. So, because it's cross-cutting, you tend to find that you will not find an express or implied provision in there, but when you consider the nature of the obligations that have been undertaken, Africa, as well as African states, are very much cognizant that the work that they will do, and in giving effect to these provisions, they will actually be enhancing the health and well-being of ecosystems and in effect the societies. One particular and key innovation that has come through over here is greater emphasis on Indigenous knowledge systems. And before I share any examples over here, it's also important to note that this particular innovation is in itself cross-cutting. And by that I mean using Indigenous knowledge systems are applicable to the climate change impacts on food systems in order to have greater yield in food security. In my cluster, as well as looking at land degradation, in achieving security as far as biodiversity, as well as looking at the last cluster, which will be land, water, and energy, and looking at the resource uses over there. And the basis of this is to actually say that when you start looking at Indigenous communities in Africa, they are the recipients of the impacts of climate change. And as a result, they have then developed their own systems to adapt to the present-day situation. So leaning on those knowledge systems and taking up those innovations will then assist African states at state and sub-regional levels to put in place policy that speaks to giving effect to the respective provisions that I made earlier. Now, one may ask, well, how do you go about doing that? How do you put in place a program that will give effect to this? One very good example is the University of Fort Hare here in South Africa, where through the Department of Science and Technology, working in tandem with them, have established the Indigenous Knowledge Systems Documentation Center. And what the university does over here is that it actually goes out to communities, engages them on respective fields, finds out how they've been or what mechanisms they've put in place to adapt to specific realities, and then document those, which then go up a supply chain of the National Recordal Center, which is actually part of the Department of Science and Technology. So what they've actually done here is that they've gone out to communities, largely in the Eastern Cape, encouraged them to form part or to create a non-governmental organization whereby the institution will be a stakeholder thereby, and providing scientific basis and scientific backing for a lot of the information they get. And once they have mulled through it, made sense of it, it then goes up to a departmental level whereby then it can be analyzed further and be ripe for policy uptake. So what we have over here is already an established value chain of how things can work from the ground level all the way up to decision makers at a policy level and even further up. Now, there have been, of course, some challenges in this regard. So, for instance, a study that was done in Eritrea, they found that there's actually a challenge in securing the sustainability of Indigenous knowledge because a lot of young people are moving to urban areas. So the potential of passing down that knowledge diminishes drastically as a result of urbanization. Number two, one of the things that were identified was that the knowledge systems exist in vernacular, so there's a great emphasis being placed in translating this. I view this as an opportunity to developing vernacular language systems into scientific languages, because I think the moment you do that, the moment you create greater access rather, to life-saving measures. So that's one particular innovation that I thought I'd bring forth, and that is the end of this particular discussion. Now let me wear my other hat as Master of Ceremonies. And I have Dr. Edmund Totin, who is in Benin, and his cluster, he was Land Degradation and Biodiversity, which was chaired by Professor Erasmus. He will be joining us online. Edmund, if you are available, you may share your screen.
Yeah, thank you, Yankela. I'm
Awesome.
Going to share my... Can you hear me?
Yes, you are audible, Edmund.
Okay, perfect. So, please, can you see my screen?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay. So, well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and I'm very grateful to the French Embassy in South Africa for hosting this event, and also thank Prof. Sherbo for your leadership, and to my colleagues club team. Well, my presentation is on land restoration and biodiversity conservation. And well, there is a general consensus that land and ecosystem degradation is a global issue that go beyond countries and also sectors. And more specifically, when we talk about land issue in general, it has to do with, land degradation has to do with land clearing for commercial purpose and subsistence agriculture. And the same thing with vegetation degradations, and that's is linked to the interaction of climate change and the land use and land change that have impact on fire regimes across Africa. And we can see it, it's quite common today in the news, where we see many part of the world clear because of wildfire. We have also that the literature is pointing that the continuous expansion of cropland and for food production will reduce ecosystems carbon sequestrations in Africa. And the same thing will also happen with the effect of climate change, that will create conditions for the spread of invasive species in Africa. But what we also found is that clearly in the literature, resource degradations in general are documented from quite narrow perspectives, and shows that they often don't account for the broader factors that may also have implications in reducing, might reduce the biodiversity and ecosystem services. In terms of framework, we have a broader framework addressing land conservation and land restoration, ecosystem conservation. But it's also clear, assuming that those issues are cross-cutting and are global issues, that there is a need of transboundary approach to strengthen the resilience of community. And the transboundary here is not only about the countries, it's not only about geographical locations, it also has to do with sectorial perspectives, where we can see that land can go across economy, social, institutional factors. I want us to highlight a few framework that we also reported in the documents. One is about the Africa Adaptation Initiatives that goes across 54 African countries, and started in 2015 to accelerate coherent adaptations and actions in Africa. We have also the Great Green Walls that goes from Senegal to Djibouti, which is another transboundary adaptation approach with about 20 African countries. We have also the United Nations Convention to combat desertifications and mitigate the effect of droughts. Those are the kind of existing framework that we managed to map in the literature. Well, for those frameworks to be effective, they require political will and resources, is financial, but also human resources. And sometimes it's clear that those things remain as major barriers that affect the implementations. In terms of innovations, policy innovations, we map a few of them, but before I present it, I should also say that land use and biodiversity conservation require the engagement of stakeholders across different sectors and different profile background, so that they get together to bring different perspectives. But also it requires a bottom-up approach to value local knowledge and be sure that people's needs and aspirations are captured in whatever is proposed or co-designed as responses. And as I earlier mentioned, land use in general is a transboundary issue. So its planning may require not only focus at local levels, but having more general perspectives. So here we mentioned some watershed or landscape perspectives. And the Great Green Wall is a good illustration of how we need this kind of multi-sectorial or multi-countries, goes beyond subnational, national, or regional perspective. The two policy innovation I wanted to highlight here is the PICSA, which is Participatory Integrated Climate Service for Agriculture. It's used in many West African countries, mainly in Senegal and in Ghana, to engage local communities, but also local authorities in climate service planning. We have also planting of fallow to contribute to soil fertility maintenance and improving conditions for food productions. So those are the kind of innovation I wanted to highlight. But for those innovations to be used, there is a need to have enabling conditions. And it's clear that ecosystem restorations or resource conservation has many dimensions: social, because it has to do with people; economic, it has to improve conditions for people, create opportunity for people, and also the environmental dimensions. And there is a need to have those different dimensions more integrated in whatever is used as solutions. And I want to report the quote that one of the participants voiced at the symposium, stating that land restoration is not only about tree planting, it also has to do with enabling water infiltration, making farm more productive, increasing income of community, and creating opportunity for peoples. So we acknowledge that this transboundary approaches is quite challenging. It's demanding, it requires resources, financials, human resources, and sometimes it's quite difficult to integrate, as countries and even municipalities might have different priorities or facing different challenges. But it's also clear that having a kind of strategic investments and strengthen the institutional capacity, that's very important, and it emerges strongly in the literature. The institutional capacity is also a way to prepare communities to take the leads and not waiting for external funding. It would create and having enabling common adaptation framework across scales. And creating incentives for collaborations are quite essential for ecosystem conservation. So broadly, those are things that we try to voice in the report and that I wanted to share with you today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Edmund. And thank you for your continued patience. We have our last presentation, and this will be by Dr. Alice from the University of Makerere in Uganda, and this particular session was chaired together with Prof. Mbao. Alice, are you online and available?
Yeah, I'm online.
Okay, you can then share your screen.
Sure. Yeah, thank you so much. I'd like to appreciate the French Embassy for hosting the event and also to thank Prof. Mbao for spearheading the initiative. Like they've introduced me, I'm Alice from Makerere University, that is Uganda, East Africa. So I'm going to talk about the land, water, and energy resources used. So the background. The land, energy, and water systems provide vital resources which are fundamental for human existence. And then there is a great interest in not only exploring these resources in detail, but also their interdependencies, the interdependencies between them and their climatic links, that is the nexus between the land, water, and energy, and then also climate change. So unsustainable use of land, water, and energy resources in Africa has resulted in detrimental adverse long-term effects. Thus, different stakeholders have come up with the solutions in form of innovations programs, models to help the suffering population. So whereas there is unsustainable use of land or energy resources to mention, still so many initiatives have been put in place to curb the challenges. And we got out certain examples of the innovations that have been, for example, in the land sector, the section, there are simple and affordable geospatial tools for tenure security in Uganda. That was an innovation, it helped to show farm boundaries and was useful in reducing conflict and improving the tenure security. And also it helped in resolving boundary disputes. So whereas we see that this innovation worked well, the boundary disputes were solved, but then there was need for multi-stakeholder engagement to make sure that there is proper dialogue between the farmers and their communities so that the initiative could be sustainable. And then also other innovations, there was the joint village land use plan for land tenure security in Tanzania, the Mane River, and so many other innovations as they're detailed in the report. So whereas a number of initiatives have been put in place to curb the effects of unsustainable land, water, and energy resources use, we find that a number of factors have determined their success or their failure or their unsustainability. The first factor that has determined success or failure is the policy frameworks of the different African governments. So the lack of policies has not been so favorable to some initiatives. When you look through some initiatives, whereas the initiatives have been put in place, the policies of the different countries have not favored the initiative, meaning that the initiative has not succeeded in that country. And then also in Africa, we have a tendency of alien policies. For example, a government adopts policies from a Western country, and then those policies don't apply to the real situation in the African country. And those policies have also led to failed initiatives. And then the inefficiency of existing policies. Yeah, some African countries have very good policies, but you find that these policies are not in place. They're not working policies. And then also cross-sectoral policies. Like people usually, for example, we have land, energy, and water. This is a nexus, meaning one is interlinked to the other. But then you find that they've made a policy for land, and this policy for land is separate from the water policies, implying that it has led to a fail. But then instances where they've been cross-sectoral policies, there has been a success. And then also, informed policies. Most African governments have made policies from offices or from things they think will work without going to the bottom to talk with the population of what is the real problem and coming up with an appropriate policy. And then the last one is favorable investment policies. You find that most of these initiatives will really need the private sector to come in so that they can invest money. But then some policies are not favorable to the private investors, especially policies on investments and subsidies. So in instances where these policies are not favorable, you find that these initiatives have also failed. So despite the excitement around the nexus between land, water, and energy resources, the policies that have been enacted to govern and use these resources are still formulated in isolation, like they are not cross-sectoral, meaning that ministries still formulate policies in isolation, and this has led to most initiatives not being effective. And then the second factor that determines the success of these initiatives is the adaptation of solutions by the local population. The population has to accept what you're bringing in. So we find that in most cases, we've seen that innovations have been implemented in different African countries, but then the local people have not received them because these innovations are not anchored within the indigenous knowledge systems. Indigenous technologies are more adaptable to local population than introducing new technologies. So that has also affected the initiatives. And then the cost of the initiatives, you find that AFDB has started a project in Tanzania or in Rwanda, but that project is expensive, meaning that they'll do one phase and then it will not continue. Yet this project was very useful. So also the cost of initiatives has led to some initiatives not being feasible, whereas they've lasted for a few months, they could not continue. And then the gender role versus society. In most cases, some of these initiatives have failed because they've not considered the gender roles in the different societies. Women have not been included. We've seen that also that women initiatives where women have been included have created greater social impact because women usually interact like in the home with the communities, and then they've empowered the girl child to mention. So we've seen that initiatives where women have been included have also shown success. And then the knowledge of the land tenure system is another factor whereby you're starting up a project, some initiatives have been started, but then without knowledge of the land tenure system in the different communities. And this has resulted in conflict. And then at the end of the day, the initiative has not been successful. And then capacity building. Some of the initiatives also, they've used high technology, whereas the local population are not skilled in that technology they've used, implying the project will stop on phase 1 and then the population will not be able to move on with the technology. That's the need for capacity building, like training the local population about the current technologies. The bottom-up approaches, I've talked about them, and they're very important for informed decision-making, thereby creating sustainability. So in conclusion, with the United Nations dedicating the individual sustainable development goals, like we know that SDG 2 is provision of food, and then for energy, SDG 7, and then sustainable land use, SDG 15. Club Africa will explore the synergies and trade-offs and intersectoral policy spillovers while achieving the goals together with their obligations. And then in conclusion, effective policy frameworks are very essential for the initiatives or innovations to be successful. That is, we consider making cross-cutting policies as compared to policies of only one sector. And then commercial investment policies are very essential for the success of an innovation, because they'll involve the private sector, which will bring in money so that the innovation can move on. And then we've seen that engaging women and marginalized communities in all initiatives is very important to ensure that they are fully inclusive and then beneficial. And embracing indigenous knowledge systems is also very vital for easy adaptation. Capacity building is very important for the locals in the area where the innovation has been put in place. And then adoption of bottom-up approaches. They help in making informed decisions and informed policies that will be accepted by the population, and then they'll be sustainable. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, that concludes the presentations by the cluster leaders as well as the chairpersons. If there are any comments or questions, you're free to pose them at this stage. May I ask that you just indicate your name and your designation. But yeah, so by raise of hands. Yes, sir.
Thank you so much. My name is Han Peter from the Dutch Ambassador to South Africa, and thank you to Ambassador Aurélien and the academicians from Club for this wonderful meeting. One dilemma that I constantly see is that whilst climate change is very important, especially African governments have so many other challenges on their plate. Look at South Africa, where you have got inequality, poverty, unemployment. So are there ways to raise climate change on the agenda, whilst at the same time addressing these other needs? Because sometimes I feel that many people think that climate change is something lofty idea from the West, from industrialized countries. So how can we get out of this dilemma? Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you very much, and excuse me if I don't stand, I have a bit of a problem with my foot. My name is Catherine Mwangi, High Commissioner of Kenya. Thank you, And, but what is encouraging today is that through the years, we've heard about climate change, we've had policies and frameworks. And I think the biggest problem has been to domesticate these policies, to ensure that indeed they are being taken up and implemented at the grassroots level. Today, what I have seen is that we're moving from boardwalk talks and meetings such as this to how to do this, to how to implement actual actions to put in place. And what I like most is this bottom-up approach and the issue about indigenous knowledge. Because what you're saying is you're not introducing foreign practices. What you're saying is understanding at the local level. What is it these people have been doing? How do we ensure that we replicate that? How do we ensure that if there's improvement to do, it is done? But really the challenge is there. When I was listening to the story of the food issue, we talked about food security, nutrition security. Now we've gone to chains. We move farm to dustbin, I think it was. So all these things, you know, bring you to think about, even talking about processed foods. I think every rural person and the poor, they aspire to eating processed foods. You see people moving from sweet potato, cassava, the local foods, and you think that is not progressive. When they get money, they buy the processed foods. So there's a huge cultural issue here, and the challenges are there. But what I can say is that it's encouraging that we're talking about what to do and using local knowledge, indigenous knowledge, to actually promote this. Thank you really for bringing this.
Thank you. There's another question here. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, thank you, Program Director. I would like to thank Prof. Bo and the whole club, and of course, my dear colleague, Ambassador of Enya, for giving us this opportunity this morning. We learned a lot. We are very, very, very impressed by what we heard here, and I would like to congratulate the whole panel of experts. The networking, Prof. Bo, is here, listening to everyone from all over the continent. The networking is here. But now, how to create the bridge between you, expert of Africa, and the decision makers, and also the communities. My colleague of Kenya just raised that point of cultural aspect. I think it's Prof. Elmet who was putting an emphasis on restoration and
Regeneration.
How to help these communities to implement solar projects? Because if we just decide that we're not cutting the trees anymore, how would they? So this bridge have to be really implemented between you, experts, the decision makers, because governments, someone raised that point, are sitting in their offices and taking decisions, not knowing what is really needed by the population. So how to create this link? I think that now, further in the discussion, you can maybe work on that. But what is sure is that I'm glad to know that Africa's voice is now on the floor, and you will be heard. Thank you for giving us this opportunity. Thank you.
Yes, we'll take two more hands. The gentleman, the lady, and then I'll come back for another round of questions.
Thank you very much, Program Director. My name is Ben Mpoko, the Ambassador of Democratic Republic of Congo to South Africa. Ambassador Chevalier, thank you very much for hosting us. I'm echoing basically what my two sisters have just said. Because as Ambassador, you participate in the decision-making, policy-making process. But it has been said, there's no linkage. What I hear in this room, what I learned this morning is that there is a wealth of knowledge in the continent. You guys are world-class experts, you know. But as my sister said, there's no linkage between what you're doing and the decision makers. Either they don't listen, or they are on knowledge of what's going on. So there's no implementation of the knowledge that I experienced this morning. It's not being implemented on the ground. You know, that's one level. I created in this country, because I came here with the United Nations, UNDP, and I created an academy to train the young farmers. From high school, you train them to be future farmers because of the problems of, so we can tackle the problems of food security. We're training about 500 young farmers a year. But when I visit the academy, they're still teaching them to do irrigation the old way, wasting a lot of water. I visited Israel, they do drop irrigation, in innovation, and they're still teaching them the old school stuff. Now, all this knowledge that we hear, how does it impact the farmer, the young farmer that we're training? Again, there's no linkage. Their knowledge got to be should be impacting what's going on the ground, the training and so forth, whether you're taking the women, the rural women, or you're taking the young people in this kind of academy, you need the linkage between this wealth of knowledge and what you're doing on the ground. Thank you.
I'll take one more question in this round. Yes, ma'am.
Yes, thank you. I'm the ambassador of Finland, Anne Lammila, and thank you, Aurelian, for organizing this event. It's been a very interesting morning, and I would like to touch upon the question that my colleague just mentioned, how to make companies, farmers engaged in what the government is doing. And we have in Finland created the so-called roadmaps. So there are government officials in there, and then you have different sectors of the society included. So you might have farmers, you have companies working in energy sector, you have companies working in pulp and paper, etc. And so what is important is to share information from the government side. This is what we are aiming at. And then we see piece by piece how this goal can be achieved. So there are tangible ways to reach that ultimate goal. But the thing is that companies, they need to know what the government is planning, what is the legislation going to be, what are the goals, how much emissions should be reduced. So in that sense, open discussion is very important and very tangible goals. And if you want to know more, I am glad to give you some detailed information. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think let me just see if I've captured everything correctly, and I'll try answer some, and I'll open the floor also to Prof. Mbao to perhaps address others. So the first question we had from the gentleman at the back, this was, if I understand your question correctly, it was how can we raise climate change adaptations in communities, which can be rife for policy uptake. Did I understand you correctly in that regard?
The question is more, given the many other problems that African countries face,
Yeah.
such as inequality, unemployment, poverty, and many people rightfully are concerned about what do I give my kids to eat tomorrow, and don't worry about climate change. How can we, in that context, raise climate change on the agenda?
Understood. I'll give that question to Prof. Mbao, who will address it. The second comment and question came from the High Commissioner in Kenya, and she basically just highlighted the key innovations, and she was very impressed by the presentation that was given, particularly the bottom up approach that we have presented, which is actually an integral part of the planning process for this particular project. Some comments also came in with regards to how do we then bridge the gap between experts, communities, and policymakers in this regard, so as to ensure that the innovations that have been presented do actually make their way to the policymakers. And I would actually even dare to say Future Africa, by undertaking this particular initiative, is perhaps facilitating that process. If anything, academics are encouraged to be engaged citizens. And what that means is that you actually have to engage with the communities whom you study. And any academic that is worth their weight in gold has to be current with the most recent innovations and scientific developments. So by So by creating, thank you very much. So by creating an initiative such as this, whereby one, you can engage with the experts who have the current scientific knowledge, be able to filter that knowledge and bring it through to the policymakers, who some of whom are sitting here, is one example that perhaps could be explored. And of course, then we have to start talking about how do we go about implementing this. And that, I think, is a further discussion that can be had. Our lady from Ambassador of Finland has indicated that they have adopted roadmaps that can be leaned on and utilized and perhaps adapted to suit Africa's situation. So we are very interested in that and will indeed be in engagement with you in that regard. So Prof. Mbao, I don't know if you want to add anything to that. Sure.
Quickly, I think you greatly addressed most of the comments. I think most of them was great comments and recommendation on the way we should implement this thing. I would like to quickly reflect on a very good point. The intrinsic separation between climate change and policy and development. I've been privileged to work for supporting the Senegalese government and now the Chad government to know how to mainstream climate change in different policies. Because, you know, dealing with climate change creates a safe operating space. It de-risks the investment. People who have been working in banks, they know that the risk of climate is now intrinsically related to investment. How much of the investment would be likely lost because of extreme events? And to do that, now there's a blending process which is happening. And the two programs I'm just mentioning, the Chad example and the Senegalese example, are a requirement of UNDP, who is supporting many of the development processes, and try to see how to safeguard at least 4 sectors: the water sector, the fishery sector, the agriculture sector, and the livestock sector. And how much can we consider the climate trends and indicators into this investment process, which is long-term commitment, to make sure that every investment doesn't fall in the crack, at the same time support the process without, you know, exposing the sector to climate change adaptation. So basically, the sectoral approach we are trying to check here is how we use not only the impact of climate change, but also the opportunities related to climate change. What we have observed in the Sahel, for instance, is an increase of rainfall recently. And you have seen many floods happening in different cities. That water can be used for something. It can be used for irrigation. It can be used for the dry season. It can be used for water ponds. I think when he was in the government, le bassin de rétention, which was a way to capture water, was a response to various development issues. And that safeguarding, that safe space, that safe operating space cannot be established without taking into account the climate change. So this blending can only happen if you do capacity, but also one important lesson we learned from those two examples is how the decision on national budget is splitted in this sector and what is the place of climate change. We have been raising awareness that it was quite lean, sometimes less than 2%, and we need to increase that part of the budget within the national budget decisions in those various sectors to make sure that climate change is taken into account. That's a very good recommendation. I think, excellent, we can also elevate that recommendation to the set of highlights that will come out of this report. I thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, I think we can take 1 or 2 more, and then we have to move on in the interest of time. I'll take the lady here.
Conveying the thanks from my ambassador, Dr. Inaxi Malta, from the who is out of the country. I just had a follow-up question on where you want to bring the findings to the attention of policymakers. Do you target only the government itself, the departments, or are you also interested to speak to parliamentarians? Because we hear within one of our projects called Climate Parliament that there's a great demand from MPs from South Africa, from Uganda, from Kenya, etc., to have more of that information about science of climate and biodiversity, but linked to the Africa context. So I would be really interested to hear from that.
Sure. And then one more, the lady at the back there. Yes.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you so much. My name is Andrea Kamfer. I am from Agri-SA. I'm a risk and disaster manager. I'm also specializing in climate change in agriculture. Agri-SA is the largest federation of agricultural organizations in South Africa. We represent about 15,000 commercial farmers through the whole agricultural value chain, so we've got a big footprint in South Africa, and it was very insightful to listen to the speakers today on these very, very important topics that we're currently facing. From organized agricultural side, this is just a base, just a broad comment, is that we're struggling to, okay, there's an influx of climate change policy and law development from national, regional in South Africa. From energy sector to the agricultural sector, the water sector. The farmer on the ground are not always that informed about what is the latest policy developments. Climate smart agricultural practices are being implemented by our commercial farmers. However, there's a lack of knowledge going to your small-scale emerging farmers. Then on the energy sector, South Africa is moving now towards a just transition to greener economy, and there's a lot of opportunities in leveraging, especially in the drier conditions within our country, which is facing drought, to invest in opportunities there to enable those farmers who've been struggling with 9-year drought cycles, how to uplift them. So that's just basically from my side, looking at climate change holistically, disaster management, which is also an element of climate change, and then enabling farmers to adapt to the effects of climate change, and then also empowering them when they have to mitigate within the climate change sector to enable them, to give them the necessary information, as there's too many policy developments and it's not coming down to the farmer on the ground. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So just to reiterate that, the first question was basically looking at how do we ensure that the recommendations that come from these will make their way to the relevant people at a political level to make the decisions. And two, and I think you highlight a very good point, in that although we are bringing up innovations and practical examples at a policy level, there's a need as well to make sure that we can distill the existing policies and the developing policies to those who are actually impacted by them. So there has to be a two-way communication street, if I understand you correctly. Okay, so I think that's something we could perhaps look at the CLAP project, and I'll hand over to Prof. Sibanda.
Thank you very much. So on the question of who are the policymakers, I think we are cognizant of the fact that decision starts bottom up. We always say those most affected by the problem are the best ambassadors for the solution. So if a farmer is suffering from recurrent droughts, low yields, you better equip them with the evidence of what needs to be changed. But they then need to equip their village chief, who then equips the local member of parliament, who then takes this to the portfolio committee for agriculture, for environment in parliament, who then makes sure that the sector ministries are then informed before it's then tabled for policy and legislation. So in our approach, we are aware of those different levels, and we've devised different tools for equipping farmers. And one of the most effective tools that we have experienced is theater for community action, theater for policy advocacy, where we get researchers to go into the community. Once they have the evidence, they come back to report. But in reporting, they get role players within the community who convene a little skit, a theater, and that brings people from the town. The members of parliament come in because there's a big event in the village that is advertised. They carry those messages and they live on because they've seen the very people making songs, making dance that is related to the issues, but infused with evidence from the research community. So we want to cultivate more of that using our local culture as Africans to infuse knowledge both bottom up and top down, so that it finds its way to the big houses where the rules are written down. Most cases it's there, but there's no platform for conduit. So we are aware of that, and we are investing in different mechanisms, tools, storytelling, songs, dance, that will ensure that bottom up, the evidence from research is distilled into African policies. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prof. Ladies and gentlemen, that brings us to the last part. Thank you so much for your patience. We are almost there. Yeah, so this is the last part. we're going to have three presentations. One very short presentations from Prof. Musundiri from the University of Technology, who will speak on the importance of African participation in the respective forums. And then we'll have representatives from UNEP, who would, hello, who will provide, who can provide us with some comments with regards to the initiative. You'll have the floor for about 5 or so minutes. And then we'll also have representatives from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundations, inviting them to make any contributions. I'll then just give a vote of thanks, and we can continue the discussions over the lovely treats that have been prepared. So this is the last leg of the relay. In isiXhosa, I would say, "Sinqanqeleza ngaphambili," meaning we are steaming ahead. So, Prof. Musundiri, are you available?
Hello, good morning, everyone.
Good morning, Prof. You are audible. May you please just share your screen?
Okay, thank you very much. My name is Robert Musundire. I'm speaking from Chinhoyi University of Technology in Zimbabwe. First of all, I would like to thank His Excellency, the Ambassador of France, for hosting this event. Also, the Future Africa for this sterling job, and members from the diplomatic communities who are here today. And most importantly, the Master of Ceremonies, who is doing a wonderful job. Thank you also. I'm going to talk about the importance of representation from Africa on climate change, biodiversity, and food security. As has been said already by other speakers, what I'm going to say has already been said, but I'm going to say it in a different way so that I amplify the volume at which these things are said, so that we actually have the African voice being represented in these discussions. From a situational perspective, this is where Africa stands. On the left side, we find out that probably 96% of agricultural production is rain-fed, and we are mostly food insecure in most parts of the world. We have high rates of undernutrition, and also infectious diseases are also prevalent amongst our communities. We also, maybe, I don't want to say it, but it's a fact, poverty is still high on us. Then the proportion of the population under the age of 25 is roughly 60%. And lastly, 65% of the labor is based on agriculture. This is where we are. And then we say climate change comes in at the center there. I just want to pick one example where we can have effects of climate change causing a reduction in agricultural production. Those are some of the consequences. We can have food shortages, price increases, and certainly conflict will arise. And that's the warrior there you see holding a spear. And migration, some of these things are already taking place as we talk. And just on the lower side of the slide, we also have a pastoral community. This is quite unique in Africa. We need to look at that as well. And some of the effects, loss of livestock, hunger, poverty, and all things coming in. So we are saying as Africa, if we don't participate in climate change discussion vividly, we are sitting on a time bomb. And those consequences, this is just one example. There are many more. Impact on the physical facilities, the infrastructure, and also the social systems are going to be highly affected. So we need to really have a strong voice in discussions that affect climate change. So what I'm saying is these are just teasers so that when we debate, we are looking at some of these perspectives that I'm highlighting. To go further, we are also saying Africa is not just sitting down and folding hands. From a mitigatory perspective, Africa is already doing a lot in order to also come up with develop solutions. And some of these examples, just to mention a few, There is a lot of research going on already on documenting the evidence of climate change and also impact on biodiversities in natural and agro ecosystem, assessment of climate change impacts, then also some studies and activities at mitigation level, at local level, resilience activities being documented with local people. And here and there, we also have national climate change mitigation activities already taking place. At policy level, we also know that there are national regional policy frameworks that are also, we can talk at SADC, East African Community level, AU level, amongst other ECOWAS and so forth. These are things already taking place within Africa. And in some cases, there are implementation pathways for some of the activities, which is quite good. So we are saying Africa is doing like other nations. We are also in the same race. So why should we not sit at the same table with equal voices? So this is the perspective that I also want to present, to say we are doing like others, so our voice should also be heard equally. And taking an example here, we are gathered under the African, the club. Yeah, this is quite excellent. And these are high-level scientists, and they can be none other representation of science as this one. So what we have is equally good to be presented at global level. But however, I would just want to say a few things in terms of the missing issues. It's also a point of discussion or debate. This has been highlighted, and I think in the report, it has been emphasized that there are lack of specific legal provisions at regional and sub-regional levels for adaptation, and lack of specific policy orientation and at regional and sub-regional level. And this has been a weak point because that voice is not really solidified into one because of these shortcomings. I think Yamkela has pointed something along those lines. So we also need to initiate a discussion to actually address these shortcomings. And I'm very happy to say the initiative is already there. So we cannot put this as a barrier. We are on the way to address this, and surely our place, our voice should be amplified as good as others. And then just finally, to highlight a few points, we are also saying Africa holds some of the largest forest resources with potential to assimilate, let me say, assimilate global emissions. So what we say also needs to be listened to equally, because this is a role that Africa is also playing in the global context. So we need to be there. Then whatever we are going to do as Africa, it is going to be impacted. It is going to impact on Africa's food, water security, livelihoods, and natural heritage. And this also, we need to look at from a global perspective. And we can't have others with bigger voices and leaving Africa out. It has to be part of the voice because of this aspect. Then the proportion of youthful population in Africa, it means we need to secure a better climate which is safe for them. I've pointed out issues to do with conflict, migration. Young people are very sensitive to these aspects. They tend to migrate, they are not patient, and some of the conflicts that might arise might come from this aspect of the youthfulness, and climate has a potential to impact this aspect of our society. And then Africa's future also depends on connecting and reconciling biodiversity conservation to its development aspiration. Like any other nation, we also have global aspirations, which are printed in the various African Union initiatives, the AU aspirations, and so forth. So we also need to actually reconcile this to global initiatives So for us to be able to do this, we need to actually be represented in the discussions with an equal voice. Then finally, let me just say there is indeed political will, and a lot of efforts are taking place at regional, sub-regional efforts, and surely this is a goodwill that should be complemented at global level, make Africa have a strong voice in terms of global discussions. I would want to end this, and I'm sure it's going to initiate a series of other debates and so forth. Thank you.
Sure. Okay. Thank you very much, Prof. Musundiri. And then, ladies and gentlemen, our last two speakers who are also part of our supporting panel, we just wish for them to give some comments on the project, and that's a representative for Dr. Meseret from UNEP, as well as Dr. Sadie from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundations. I'd like to give you the platform for 2 to 3 minutes, perhaps to give us some of your comments with regards to the project. So I'll invite the gentleman from UNEP, and then Dr. Sadie will have the last leg. Thank you so much. You can come forward, sir.
I don't know whether it's morning or afternoon. Yes, it's just noon on the dot. So I don't know whether the glass is half full or half empty. But I was going to speak on behalf of Dr. Meseret because she was having challenges to connect, but I understand she is online. So maybe let's just give her an opportunity to give her remarks and yeah, if possible. Yeah.
Dr. Meseret, are you with us? She seems to still be. She's still, okay. Okay, then you can perhaps.
All right, thank you so much, Program Director, Your Excellency, or should I actually rather say Your Excellencies, because we have quite a number of ambassadors that are with us in the room. Prof. Sheikh Mbo, it is a great pleasure, to be here. And as I indicated earlier, Dr. Meseret, who is the head of UNEP in South Africa, had planned to be with us and connect virtually. But as it happens sometimes with technology and also other commitments, she couldn't be here. So she just requested that I relay, some of the remarks that she had and express, her commitment and the commitment of UNEP to work with us. To work with as part of the Club Africa program. I will not go through everything that has been said, but suffice to just say we are very much in agreement with regards to the thoughts around climate, the thoughts around the interface between, the science and researches that we're getting, that finding expression in the policies, and then how that can then be implemented in terms of the practical implementation of projects. So I will not belabor that, but just to add our voice that we're in agreement. If you allow me, Program Director, just to maybe go through maybe 3 points in 4 minutes, 59 seconds, if that's okay. Yes. So just a couple of things, just very high level highlights around some of our thoughts, which are very much in alignment with, what has been presented, by the astute speakers that went before me. We feel there is need for what we call an amalgamated approach, to intervening, on climate change. And solutions that we should come up with should be ones that integrate both mitigation and adaptation. And how do we do that? By, for instance, and there are many ways. For instance, positioning clean energy so that it can power ecosystem-based adaptation. So that way you bring, that hybrid approach, so to speak. And to that end, there was a lot that, has been spoken about around water security, food security. So such projects could simultaneously have elements of energy and energy security, so that we don't just focus on one side, which is mitigation, or on one side, which is adaptation. But whatever solutions we come up with, how can we make sure that in that particular project or pilot project, we bring both elements together? I think that will have, great effect and great impact. Examples would be clean captive installations and how those can power or enable or advance the first two, which is your energy, your water security, food security interventions. And that brings to the fore the point that was made earlier around a holistic or integrated approach, and we can go into how the policies, to enable that can be made coherent, can be made clear, can be harmonized, in those frameworks. Second point, very quickly, Program Director. The science policy practice, I touched a bit on that. And we appreciate very much the work that Club Africa is doing, because we feel this platform is a great vehicle, for us to then action and put into practice the science that we'll get from this process and the research that we'll get from it. And on that note, as UNEP, we have a strong conviction that that science, that research, how do we, funnel it into actual implementation, pilot projects? Let us, the experience that we've got through the programs that we run in the country, and even beyond, in all the countries we are in Africa, is that pilot projects are very, very effective. Sometimes you learn by doing, and there might not be resources to do a major, a mega project, big projects, well and fine. Can we pilot? And from that, what lessons, can we derive so that we can then replicate, we can then upscale, we can then adopt maybe from another country, and adapt, to, the context of another country or even community. Within the same country, you could adopt from one area, one province, and adapt it, to adapt that solution to another context, which is in another community or another province. And this aligns very well with Future Africa's approach, which is premised on another things. Just to highlight a few things, bottom-up approach, the bottom-up effort that was spoken about earlier. Tested innovations. How do we test the innovations and then be able to say, okay, what is working, what is not working? How can we modify, those interventions so that they can work better in the future? Domestic knowledge, indigenous knowledge that has been touched on. We're very much in agreement and we add our voice to that. On the issue of policy implementation gaps, we've recognized that the major challenge is on the means of implementation. What tools could we bring into the relevant people's hands so that they can run with it, or be it resources that are needed, for implementation? Final point, Program Director, women, and that has been touched on. We have seen and recognized through the projects and programs that we run that women are very, very strong or key drivers or agents for change. So we must not underutilize the potential that they have. And our projects across the continent have demonstrated that. They play a very crucial role in the development and adoption of climate smart solutions, because women are the ones that go to fetch firewood, they are the ones that cook. So if we have innovations, what better way to bring them into implementation and adoption than to actually convince the women that actually use them, to adopt them, So I think there's scope for us to actually, exploit that opportunity. And like I said, the primary energy managers in households, so they can do quite a lot in bringing these solutions into use. Just in conclusion, the message that I was requested to convey is that we can, this initiative rather aligns with the UNEP's medium-term strategy, which is premised on 3 pillars: climate action, nature action, and pollution action. And as Club Africa, and I believe we are also now a part of the family, and I can speak, as a part of this astute and, august family. Let's raise the game. And what do we mean by that? We must aspire to do better in the spirit of building back better. What do we mean? We must aspire to do better. We must aspire to do more. We must aspire to do quicker. And we must aspire to do together, which is what we're doing right now. Thanks, Program Director.
Thank you very much from our speaker from UNEP. Without keeping you much longer, I'd like to invite Dr. Sadie from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation to share his remarks and comments on the initiative.
Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. I think now it's clear it's the afternoon. I'd like to begin by conveying our most sincere appreciation and gratitude to His Excellency Ambassador Le Chevalier, who has actually introduced us to this initiative early on, and also for warmly welcoming us to his home. I'm also cognizant of the fact that we also have a number of ambassadors and high commissioners and would like to acknowledge them, and including our own ambassador from Senegal, Ambassador Ndiaye. Also, warm greetings and thanks to the scientific community that has been engaged in this work under the leadership of Professor Mbow. We are extremely proud of you for the very hard work that you're doing to make a difference for Africa where it actually matters. So I wanted to just share a few thoughts in terms of why we felt that we needed to support this initiative. And just a couple of remarks based on some of the things that I heard here as we think about where we're going from here. We are extremely impressed by the work that is being done by these scientists to really elevate science and the work that is being done in the continent. As we all know, African countries are among the most challenged when we think about climate change, the reduction of biodiversity, and also food insecurity. And sadly, as we think about the future, it is very likely that this challenge is going to be more pronounced unless we take very urgent action to reverse this trend. Yet, when you go on a global stage, these issues are usually led by policymakers and scientists from the North, who may not always fully appreciate how this challenge is actually unfolding and playing out for the most vulnerable, and in places that they sometimes don't know enough about. This is why we felt that supporting this effort to enable scientists who are on the ground, who can better appreciate what is happening also on the ground, to weigh in and help also come up with solutions that are actually fit for purpose. So that was the main reason why we felt that we really needed to be involved. And then I'm conscious of the fact that I'm between you and the beverages and lunch, and I'll just make two comments. The first one is that as I was listening into the different speakers, there was a very interesting and very important conversation around how this work would actually be connected to what the policymakers would be doing as we move forward. And sorry, Professor Mbow, I'll probably put you on the spot here, is that I very much believe that some of the work that you have started with a group of scientists associated with this initiative could also be a platform to try and strengthen that and make it fit for purpose. Second one is that we've often attended many discussions where a new initiative is kicked off, and then there's a momentum on that initiative. Later on, less momentum, and before you know it, we move on to a different initiative. So the reason I'm saying that is that I'm very, very much hoping that this is a platform that would be sustained, and that the momentum that we build here becomes a reality. And for that reason, I'd like to also to confirm that we would be very much working alongside you to try and make sure that this is sustained and supported in the way we should, and obviously invite others to join us in making this a reality. Thank you very much for involving us and for giving us this opportunity.
Thank you very much, Doctor. Your Excellency, I don't know if you'd like to make any closing remarks.
Just two closing remarks to thank you and to tell you that a light cocktail will be served in the garden in a couple of minutes. And so please join us and enjoy the invitation. The second remark is to tell you again, and I think it really goes with what you just heard, to say that our level of ambition for this initiative is very high. We're not just brainstorming this morning or carefully listening to interesting insight from scientists. At the end of this month, hopefully, we will have in our hands a report, recommendations, an executive summary, concrete options called Voice of Africa. And it will be our responsibility to convey this voice everywhere, everywhere. It will be very sound in terms of scientific base, as we see now. So it will be very legitimate in a way. So there is no fear, no doubt. And there will be the opportunities at the global stage and the international scene to promote these ideas. So don't be strangers to that initiative. Be a part of it. Be a player through your channels at the UN level, with the clusters of foundations, through the embassies to your capital cities. Bring these proposals, these recommendations everywhere. Let's be the new viral, and it will be something that I'm sure can receive a very broad echo in the weeks and months to come, so that at least this implementation gap that Professor Mbow was mentioning will be filled in. So that's what we have in mind. You will hear about us in the next days and weeks. It's the beginning of the journey, but I think it's a very exciting one, and it will be, I'm sure, a collective endeavor. Thank you very much. Mr. Dean.
Sorry, would there be possibility to translate the report in other languages?
Yes, that's part also of the process. I'm not sure it will be available at the last day of the month, but very soon. Thank you. Thank you very much, Doctor.
Well, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. That does conclude our agenda for today. But before we commence with the lovely cocktail function, I do want to extend another Sincere gratitude to the French Embassy for hosting us on this particular day. Your Excellency, we are indeed very grateful for your hospitality. Further, a thank you to our partners at UNEP, at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundations, at the AFD, who are supporting this initiative. We, of course, will continue engaging with you, and likewise are indeed very grateful. Last but not least, our guests, dignitaries, stakeholders, community leaders, thank you for coming and honoring us with your presence, both physically and online. We will create platforms whereby we can accept more of your recommendations and innovations and make sure that they find their way into this most important report and keep you abreast as to developments as we go along. I am told there will be a group photo in front here. Okay, there will be a group photo in front here, so please make your way forward. And with that, that concludes the agenda for today, and thank you very much once again.